What's up, guys? It's Britt, and welcome back to another episode of Missing Black Voices. And happy Black History Month, guys. I hope you took last week to practice some self-care. I wanted to show support and solidarity behind Taylor Young's family. I posted it on Instagram and on Twitter that he was found, but I will be covering the details of that in another episode that I'm going to release later on this week. So, this week, to celebrate Black History Month, I have a surprise double-sode for you guys, which is a double episode. I'll be taking you back in time to the 1980s to tell you two stories of two Black girls from opposite sides of the country who both disappeared under mysterious circumstances. This first case begins in 1982 out of Baltimore, Maryland, when a young girl vanishes after leaving her house one evening to go get candy from her local grocery store, leaving her family devastated. But it prompts a series of events that even had me taking pauses when researching this case. This is the story of the disappearance of Toya Katrina Hill. March 24th, 1982 started out as a normal day for 8-year-old Toya Hill. It was a Wednesday, so she went to school at City Springs Elementary, where she was in the 3rd grade. Toya returned back from school that day where her mother, Miss Annette Stanley, were, along with her brother and 2 sisters. I saw some reports that said 2 brothers and 1 sister. I'm not 100% sure, but I do know she had 3 siblings. Annette prepared a snack for the children, and after they were done eating, she gave Toya permission to go outside in the courtyard and play with her friends. Annette left at about 6:15 that evening to go to a dress fitting. In just 3 days, she was set to marry a man named John Poindexter. By this time, all of the kids were back in the house. Sometime after Annette left, Toya told her older sister, who was 10 at the time, that she was going to go to the local grocery store to go get candy. This was extremely unusual for many reasons. Number one, although the grocery store was just 2 blocks away, Toya wasn't allowed to walk anywhere by herself, which, rightfully so, because if you remember, she's only 8 years old. And number two, Toya was described as a shy girl who hated to get in trouble. She never got in trouble at school, and she wasn't known to go against her mom or any of the adults that were in charge of her. So why Toya decided that night that she would go to the grocery store by herself is unknown. However, Toya knew that she wasn't allowed to go anywhere by herself, and her sister made sure to remind her that if Annette found out, she would be mad. Regardless, Toya said she didn't care and left anyways. It was on her way to the store where witnesses say they saw Toya in the parking lot talking to 2 adult men, one of whom was Annette's ex-boyfriend, Wayne D. Martin Sr. There are conflicting reports if Toya actually made it into the grocery store. Some reports said that she made it inside to purchase her candy. Others say she didn't make it inside at all. What is agreed upon is that Annette arrived back home at around 7:30 that evening, and Toya was nowhere to be found. Toya Katrina Hill was reported missing soon after. About 150 people came out to search for Toya that evening on March 24th. They canvassed the neighborhood for hours with no success. Toya had vanished. After learning that Toya was last seen with Wayne and his friend, Annette immediately suspected that they had something to do with it, more specifically Wayne. And this is where the story gets pretty interesting, because Annette believed that the ex-boyfriend took Toya as a plot to get back at her since she was getting married in a few short days. Wayne denied this accusation, but cops still brought him in and questioned him and his friend. Both men were released and cleared as suspects in the case. And remember when I said in the beginning of this episode how there were some things in this case that kind of made me take a pause? Well, Annette went ahead with that wedding just 3 days after Toya disappeared, the same wedding that Toya was supposed to be a flower girl in. And many reports and message board threads bring up this fact as a way to show that Annette was crazy or insensitive to her daughter disappearing. But according to the Noir True Crime Files podcast, Annette was so distraught over her missing daughter that she had a breakdown during the wedding and couldn't finish opening her gifts. Annette believed that once Wayne saw that she was moving forward with the marriage, he would bring Toya back. Unfortunately, this didn't happen. Police questioned about 150 people in regards to the disappearance of Toya, but there were no leads. Annette said that she would call Wayne and leave messages pleading for him to return Toya back to her. However, Wayne would call her back and repeatedly deny having anything to do with her disappearance. Annette eventually got a divorce from John, and interestingly enough, she would go on to rekindle her relationship with the same man she believed took her daughter. Annette came up with a plan to get back together with Wayne in hopes that he would tell her if he was involved with Toya's disappearance. She said, "I thought maybe he would give her back to me. At the time, I would have done anything as a mother to get answers." Annette and Wayne would marry for just a few short months. Not only was this marriage short-lived, but according to the Noir True Crime Files podcast, it was riddled with domestic violence. There were several police reports filed stating that Wayne had gotten physical with Annette. After she didn't get any clues from him concerning Toya's disappearance, she divorced him. Wayne has since passed away. There were remains found in the late 2000s that were believed to have been Toya's. However, that didn't pan out. The family was swabbed and it turned out that it was not her. At the time of her disappearance, Toya stood at 4 feet and 80 pounds. She had black hair, brown eyes, and a chipped front tooth with a deep dimple in her left cheek. She had on a blue jacket with a blue and orange striped top and blue jeans. She also wore prescription glasses but didn't have them on at the time of her disappearance. Toya was born on August 24th, 1973, so at the time of this recording, she would be 48 years old. Although I have seen a lot of criticism thrown at Toya's mom, and even though I took a pause at a couple of the details in this story, I want to say that I in no way place the blame on Annette. She's a victim just as much as Toya is, and honestly, grief can make you do some crazy things. Toya was just a child when she was taken away from her family, and I can't even imagine the pain of having a child just disappear like that. And Annette's actions aren't the only thing that struck me in this case. Toya's actions did as well. She was known as an obedient child who never went against any of the adults in her life. So, what exactly made her decide that that night she was going to do the exact opposite? Did someone tell her to meet up with them under the guise of buying candy? Was she being coached by someone that no one knew about? There weren't and still aren't any suspects or persons of interest that have been released to the public. And with Wayne now dead, did the answer to what really happened that night die with him? The last interview I could find on Annette Stanley was in a Baltimore Sun article from February of 2011. At the time, she still lived in the general area where Toya was last seen. She said that while she acknowledged that Toya might be dead, she remains in that area with hopes that Toya may try to find her one day. Anyone with information concerning Toya Hill's disappearance is encouraged to contact the Baltimore Police Department at 410-396-2284. Her case number is 822C47385. This is where Toya's story is currently at. I don't believe that this is the end, but just a place where we can put a bookmark until there's more updates on her case. And now we're going to fast forward to almost 2 years later in Austin, Texas, just a few days after New Year's, which is usually a time reserved for celebrations, resolutions, and a new start. A family experiences their worst nightmare when their 2-year-old toddler disappears from their front yard. This is the disappearance of Tanisha Lorraine Watkins. Tanisha Lorraine Watkins was born on August 22nd, 1981, to Deborah Watkins in Austin, Texas. Deborah lived with her great-grandmother, Miss Lorraine Dory, at her mobile home in southeast Austin. Miss Lorraine inspired Tanisha's middle name. Deborah was just 14 at the time she had given birth and had dropped out of the ninth grade to raise Tanisha. Miss Lorraine described Deborah as being a good little mother and said that she stayed home during the day to take care of Tanisha. On Thursday, January 5th, 1984, just days after the new year, Tanisha was playing on her swing set at around 1:30 in the afternoon. Now, 16-year-old Deborah was inside of their trailer, sweeping a rug while keeping an eye on Tanisha in the front yard. According to a November 1984 article in the Austin American-Statesman, Deborah's chores diverted her attention from Tanisha for just a few minutes, but when Deborah returned her attention back to the child, she was gone. When Deborah couldn't find Tanisha, she went over to her neighbor's house to ask for help. They both started to search for the toddler, but couldn't find her. That's when Deborah called the police at about 3:37. The Austin Police Department started their search later on that afternoon. They brought out police dogs and were also joined by a Department of Public Safety helicopter who used an infrared sensing device to search the area. Still, no Tanisha. The days following, police and local citizens continued to search for baby Tanisha, focusing on the field behind the trailer. But this was extremely tough considering the field went on for about 15 to 30 acres and was covered with thick grass and trash. Even with police using what they called a grid search, which is where they walk over an area no more than 6 feet apart, there was still no trace of Tanisha. Police said they didn't find any physical evidence that Tanisha had been kidnapped or harmed in any way. However, Miss Lorraine believed that someone took Tanisha from their front yard that day and ran off with her. There weren't any leads or tips for the first 10 months of Tanisha's disappearance, but the cops did receive a tip from a couple in another part of Austin who were moving into their apartment, and they said that they believed they saw a little black girl who appeared to be Tanisha. Unfortunately, when the cops went to go check out the little girl that they were talking about, it turned out that it wasn't her. There are several articles that state that a witness reported seeing Tanisha the day that she went missing with a slender, bearded man wearing a green army hat. My main source, the Austin American-Statesman, doesn't mention this witness sighting anywhere, and I couldn't find any more information on this bearded man. So I don't know if he's white, black, short, tall, old, young, nothing. And I wish I could give you guys more details on him, but the information just isn't there. At the time of her disappearance, Tanisha Watkins was just 3 feet tall and weighed 42 pounds. She had brown eyes and black hair that was braided into two pigtails at the time. She was wearing a short sleeve white pullover and red pants and white sneakers with Velcro. Tanisha would be 40 years old at the time of this recording. And just like Toya's case, I saw a lot of criticism towards Tanisha's mom, Deborah, when I was researching. Some people believe that Deborah had actually something to do with her disappearance, and some people blamed Deborah for her disappearance as well, for not watching her the entire time that she was outside. But I don't have kids, so I can't speak on keeping a watchful eye on them at all times. What I can speak on is being a child and being separated from my parents. I mean, how many times can you remember being left in an aisle of the grocery store just for maybe 60 seconds because your parents thought you were following behind them when they went to the next aisle? Or how many times can you remember hiding in between the clothing rack while your parents shot for clothes? Tanisha was just 28 months old when she vanished from her front yard. And keep in mind that this was the early 1980s. The internet wasn't out yet, and really all people had were the TV, radio, and the local newspaper. Throughout my research, I found about 8 articles in Austin, so that's a local newspaper, not national, concerning Tanisha. And even then, there were very few details, and some of the details would completely contradict the others from the previous article. And it's frustrating because at the end of the day, two Black girls are gone without a trace. And there are two families who don't have answers that deserve them.